Ladies and gentlemen, another castover for your viewing pleasure. Today we have Neblime taking on Veeq. Let's see what's happening. Over here in the top right, we indeed have Neblime as his Terran, and in the bottom left we have Veeq as his Zerg. This will be an interesting matchup. This is post many of the changes that we have seen fairly recently to Cosmonarchy. Yes, it is just Cosmonarchy now. One of the things that you may notice is that transitions between the menus are a lot faster, and that actually means that even like closing the game is a lot faster. As a developer who has to like get in the game and then close the game very frequently, I gotta say that it feels really, really good. So I will shout out Dark and Fantasies for that, among other things. Of course, other than that, we have been making a number of general changes to costs and particularly like the balance of costs. And by balance, I literally mean like how many minerals versus how much gas and that sort of thing. So you will probably see a lot more units if you decide to play after not playing for a while, or you just check out the new update in general. You'll see a lot more units that cost more gas than they used to, more gas than minerals, that sort of thing. We might see Neblime showcase some interesting details pretty soon, because while the Zerg have for a while, since the end of Ascension number 7 at the end of the last year, they've had the tier 1.5 treatment, where their pool can turn into a Vornath pond. It looks like there was a pause, but also Veeq was trying to figure out what to do with his worker. He's been idling it for a while now, as the stockade is indeed finished. And Neblime's scout is nearly here. But yeah, the main thing I think that's interesting is that 1.5 change meant that you kind of spend a little bit more Vespene with the explicit idea that what you want to do is get a little bit more army specialization, access more units, fill in your composition without having to wait all the way till 900 Vespene for the Iral Iris and then whatever requisite tech after that. So we've kind of done a similar thing for the Terrans. The Covenant, which is the add-on that enables Eidolons, formerly Ghosts, and the new unit, the Savant, is now available from Tier 1. It costs 100 of each resource. And then when it comes to the Fulcrum, which is... I mean, people may have forgotten about this, but actually a while ago, like post-Ascension 7, it was actually buffed to make it so that it only required 150 minerals instead of the 200 minerals it previously required. And one of the main things that I like about the new Fulcrum is that you can indeed make a Palladium for 150 minerals and 100 gas. So, ironically, it's actually more expensive than the Fulcrum itself, but it does give you access to the Phalanx, and indeed it does give you access to the Madrigal, all from Tier 1. Interestingly enough, we are on a map called Derelict by Biddyb, and it features the neutral Vespene geysers in the middle, as well as, of course, the Treasury. When you have a neutral or allied town center, like the Treasury is, you can return resources to it, no matter which player you are, because every player is allied with neutral. That's how it's considered. So Veeq could have actually used his scout to stick around here and get a little bit of extra Vespene, but it doesn't look like he's too interested in that. He's actually not harvesting any gas whatsoever, going entirely off of Quasis now with his in-base hatch and expanding as we see a Vestry being plopped down to support the Stockade Maverick army over here. Neblime doing his best Benno impression. Benno will actually be playing in the upcoming March Invitational. There's going to be 2 Invitationals, and one will be at the beginning of the month. I hope to see many, many people there. In fact, as of right now, we actually have a full house of signups, but I always encourage people to continue to sign up because you never know who's going to show up and who's going to not, so we might need an emergency substitute at the last minute. So that will be something to keep in mind. And if you've been hungry for more Cosmonarchy events and more general news about the game, and you've been wondering where the project's been at, I got to tell you guys, it's been in active development. You just got to hop into our Discord server to see the details. There are some Hurricans filling out the composition for Neblime as he gets his own expansion up, and he is going to go ahead and add a Fulcrum. Our worker counts are relatively even as we currently stand, and we have this interesting little concave shape of Quasis. This would probably look pretty good versus something like maybe, Legionnaires or Zealots if he was facing off against Protoss. I don't know how I feel about it versus ranged units, but there are some Hurricans coming as well. Looks like both of our players just kind of handshaking, going to play a little bit safe here. I will say another point to add is that these players both prefer the macro game, and so I suspect we will end up seeing some generally like fairly lengthy games, or at least like mid-table games in terms of length. The reason I think that is going to be a very obvious move to a very obvious prediction is as a Zorka Shroud comes down, so that's very interesting from Veeq. One of the things that I'm just suspecting out of this is we will invariably see the rise of the early action as the competition continues. And until then, you're going to see these macro-oriented players, Veeq indeed putting down a 4th hatch, adding some K-Grunts behind it for extra surface area. His Quasis will probably just deal with this Watchdog that's snooping on him as soon as he realizes it's happening. There's a move out coming. Neblime and Veeq, Neblime has done aggressive stuff in the early game, and I think Veeq has done aggressive stuff as well, if you look back to his games in Ascension 7. But he was usually the guy who would prefer to play those macro games. He really thrived in that environment. Some might even say he was actually better than even Neblime at it, and Neblime is someone who really did a lot of work on the on that particular front. So he's kind of known for the guy who just likes to build Masons forever. And meanwhile, over here, Veeq was actually able to defeat him on Infinite Velocity in their series. Of course, Neblime did manage to come back in that set, but that's just kind of goes to show you stuff. So there will be a Madrigal drop. Fomenting, we see the Star Pad, which is a little bit more expensive now as well. Air in general has been made more expensive to access, and some of the air units themselves have been made more expensive to field, even one of. So that's the general gist of things. We will see a second Star Pad, very interesting, an Anciel to go along with the Madrigal because the Zorka Shroud was scouted. So some lessons are still present. We actually have 2 more hatches being added. So Veeq he's going to be a 2-base 6-hatch Zerg at this point, and that is an interesting thought as well. Getting some Lachezelisks out, queued up a hell of a lot of them, and in fact he's got 6 in going at once. His worker count is looking healthier than Neblime's, but don't count Neblime out just yet. He hasn't shown the tier 1 quarry, so it's a little surprising. I think maybe he'll realize it's there eventually. Trying to figure out how to fit it into the build order. It's 100 Vespines, so as much as I'm a little bit of a jokester when it comes to, oh, he's not building more Masons. No, it makes total sense why you wouldn't. And that's another thing. I was talking about how we're probably going to see more macro-oriented games out of these two, and the aggression will be delayed a little bit. That's because, in my opinion, I think it's just better to figure out the details of, how aggressive you can be and what you can actually do. So that Maverick was dead to rights, but at least he spotted out the move out. Now the Anciel returning home before it even tries to scout. I thought maybe 12 o'clock was going to be a cheeky little base here for Neblime, but that's actually a Maverick just looking around, spotting for any drops or airplay. But it doesn't really seem like that's the play here. We've got a lot of Lachezelisks. The Anciel is going to be a huge problem in terms of detection. We only had the one Madrigal. A second one is here. We don't have a drop or anything like that. I've been watching the minimap. No thing to report. And on top of that, the fact that there's no phalanx with this, it's going to make the Lachezelisks really effective. So this is a very scary fight, and as soon as they get the burrows down, they can absolutely do some serious damage. But it looks like the Madrigal makes its way in. There's actually another one that does get caught on the way out, and all of the bio has been shredded, essentially. A lot of Quasilisks, plenty more to come from, and yeah, that Madrigal should have probably deployed. We've got some Wraiths behind this. Of course, the Anciel has gone down in the meantime, it looks like, so we won't be able to detect the Lachezelisks. And a bit of a pull away, I think a little bit premature there from Neblime, since he actually wasn't in danger of being attacked. There's only 2 Lachezelisks left. But the bulk of this force has been dealt with. Now he just needs to be able to detect it. He does have an Anciel on the way. It's only halfway done, so it's going to be a little bit annoying. He's going to see if he can land on them to force the unburrow, which is a cheeky move. Here we go. We'll see if he gets both of them. Looks like just one of them. There goes one. Reinforcements are coming. There's only the one Madrigal deployed right now. Zoryuselets are the choice of Veeq, and now you can't land on top of that. You're going to have to pull that Ministry up, buddy. Still only the one Lachezelis. The Anciel rather has arrived. There's no anti-air over here, so yeah, it looks like this is just going to be enough for Veeq to fall away and reconsider his choices, his angle of attack. He wanted to pressure. He's got a lot of Quasis, but there is no Hydrith Den. It's not finished yet. And of course, crucially, the Vornath Pond is done, but I don't see any Vorvs, and I certainly don't see any Naths. So the things that you get out of that gas expenditure, not actuated just yet in Veeq's composition. Still, a lot of pressure. Does maintain the worker advantage, has gotten his third up and running, and there is no third base coming for Neblime. So now kind of forced into some action. The Wraith Anciel combo is sort of fending off the attackers a little bit, although one of them has fallen. And this is a very interesting, very Neblime-esque game to go for both Madrigals earlier, now that you can add a Palladium super early into the game, and also go for Mass Wraiths. So he's only got the one Anciel, and it is leading out. That will mean that the Hydras will feast on its bones. There's nothing to be done about that. And now, with only the 9 Wraiths in this situation, we are going to see Bactals, because that Hydra Den did turn into the Ski-backed Scab. And now we do at least have 6 o'clock being harassed by this worker. At some point, Veeq will figure that out. But honestly, the Bactals being over here, it's not a small number, right? There was like 14 or so Hydras being mutated in the first place. Now we're going to have 9 Bactals on the front line. These artillery sort of like they're an artillery strain for sure, even though they're not like super long range. The fact that their bounces can hit targets behind definitely gives them a little bit of extra range. So that's definitely something you got to watch out for. And again, there's not been... Okay, now we have a Phalanx. So the problem with this is that if the Phalanx gets moved in on by these Bactals, the armor, you lose all of your tank armor when you're in siege mode. So that could be a really big deal, and the Zoroastrian crucially picked up a number of those Phalanx shots. So you can see here instantaneously he's going to start to fall back with that Phalanx, try to siege into a more defensive position because the Bactalisks will snipe it very fast. Even in this situation, just attacking the Madrigal, which is a pretty nice amount of kills, we can now hold Alt to see that it's dealt about 2k damage. Rate's now returning as well, maybe looking for a Shaman to be repaired, but I don't see one on the field. And finally, a third base being started. Zeth Flood coming in here just to see if there was anything at 3 o'clock. Turns out there is not, and this dutiful Maverick has been patrolling since near the beginning of the game. Now we have a Shaman coming for Neblime to heal up his flock of Wraiths. However, one of the things I'm still waiting for is to see when he's going to transition his tech. He's definitely stayed very committal. He's adding another Vestry. Shamans themselves are fairly, gas-intensive. Rates are 25 a pop, and he's been making those nonstop. A Phalanx a little bit further forward. We've got a second Fulcrum. I can only imagine that's going to be another Palladium for more consistent artillery production. Maybe he can, burst out of here, but I feel like this is really, really rough for him, particularly given the situation. He's not really able to force himself out. This is not the, there's no cliff advantage over in this situation. He's got some Mavericks in one of those anchors, nothing in the other, so that's a potential bit of awkwardness there. He's trying to snipe forward and see if he can pick off the Bactals, but it's definitely a little bit slow going. The flank coming in from the top rope. Veeq trying to put the hurt on him, but hey, there's 2 Phalanxes. A third one could siege. I feel like this is still doable for Neblime, but he's losing a lot of his Wraiths. He's only down to 6. Bactals have mostly stayed alive this whole time. So, done some damage. And behind this, by the way, Veeq is going for that tier 2. He's got a lot of idle workers. Wasn't able to successfully take that 6 o'clock base. So it feels a little bit awkward for him to transition from this point. But he has got a lot of minerals, so he can absolutely flood in some Vorvs maybe with the next round. The evolved Zethrakor, our name for the Zergling. And you absolutely see a little bit more fodder with this army to really tie down the Phalanxes. And Phalanx, in Cosmonarchy, the Phalanx actually deals a little bit more like wider explosive range. So the splash range being bigger can actually be more of a deficit, a detriment for the Terran player if you can get on top of them and the tanks are spread well enough. Kind of like you always think about like zealot bombing and stuff in conventional TVP with Brood War. In Cosmonarchy, what you would want to do as the Zerg player is definitely try to engage with those Vorvs, especially since there's not really that much that's kind of blocking that right now. We don't have a lot of Cyprians, we don't have an overwhelming number of Mavericks, Madcaps, Sentinels, and nothing that can deal damage to the Vorvs before the Phalanx mortars hit. 12 o'clock cleared by those Zeths. Zeths in pretty much every base, just making sure that there's nothing to deny additional expansion attempts. And it looks like we will indeed see 9 o'clock taken. There were some Quasis moving out over here. I don't know if they were just... No, they're on an attack move. That's a little peculiar. Feels like maybe the Wraiths showed themselves somewhere else, and that made Veeq consider his situation. These are not upgraded static defenses, so it's just the regular Spraits, but it will be enough to sort of zone those Wraiths away. But Neblime has landed his 3rd, so we will be able to see a little bit more going on now, I think. 12 o'clock being pushed a little bit further forward. Neblime is nearly completed with his Atlas. That is tier 2, as you can see right here. So that is done. We will indeed see a couple more, additional production coming out. So one of the things that this add-on change for the tech does, from a design standpoint, as this 12 o'clock base is going to be once again occupied by hostile forces, Neblime will have to invest a little bit more into clearing that out, sending down 10 Hurricanes to see what he can do to try to really fixate on that 6 o'clock base. Little does he know, Veeq has chosen 9 for his number. The thing about the add-on tech is, it definitely means that if you haven't spec'd into add-ons for your tier 1 structures, getting to tier 2 does nothing for you for that particular reason. So, it is what it is. It just means that if you're going for tier 2 and you're you've been scouted as not having any add-ons, you're probably not going to be committing into like Palladiums or Covenants. You might not even be committing into, you know, Quarries or Anvils for that matter. But those can always come in a little bit later. Sentinels coming online. I do believe this is before I added the gas cost to them. These games were played. A lot of the changes were made sort of piecemeal because for one, it helps me think a little bit more about them in totality. A huge flock of mutas, by the way. Holy moly, do we have a lot of mutas. That's 32 mutas. So this could end very, very swiftly because the starports are only now coming online and the Valkyries are nowhere to be found. The Sentinels are going to engage this force. Plenty of range and plenty of splash damage, but maybe he's done enough to bamboozle his opponent. Neblime hasn't really been able to get much scouting done. There was a big bloodbath down there with all the Harakans, and the Watchdogs are indeed going to be watching no longer. The Atlas now taking a lot of hits. The Madrigals are scrambling to try to get through, but the Phalanxes are helpfully blocking the path, and that Atlas is below the third of its HP. That will be taken care of, and away it goes. A lot of gas down the drain. Now, admittedly, if Veeq loses all of the gas investment into these Madrigal or into these Mutalisks, that might be enough for him to just say, oh, maybe that was like a fair trade. The Valkyries are almost completed, but now a lot of the workers are getting hit. Admittedly, Neblime is ahead in workers, but not in bases, so Veeq will definitely still have the superior situation. And despite all of those mutas, right, despite that huge investment, despite killing the Atlas, okay, yes, killing the Atlas is a big deal, right? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it wasn't like a good thing. It's just like, you know, the fourth base is coming online. Those mutas probably could be better served at this current stage, since they still do exist, right? He only lost what? Oh yeah, he lost 11 of them, so that was a pretty big investment. But he still has 23. He can absolutely use them to sort of pressure a response, maybe try to like focus on this area. And the Wraiths are now moving around, getting spotted out by Zethrakors. You know, obviously a situation that you don't really want to be in Neblime's case. This base, surprise 9 o'clock hasn't been operational for a little bit longer here. Veeq was definitely focused on the mutas, it looks like. So it took him a while to actually get this operational. Now I think he's going to pay for it, as he will have to pinch off some of his units. In this case, it's the mutas. Accounting for where the mutas are on the map is really, really helpful for Neblime. So it looks like he is going to be shooed away by that. And he might actually be caught up by this. You know, obviously there's the cloaking part, but the mutas outrun the Wraiths, you know, being higher tier units. Here come the Valkyries to try to pinch off, but at the same time, the Hydras and Bactyls, they're also in a good spot. So those mutas will indeed fall back. The Phalanx is trying to shell out for support from across the tar pit, but is it going to be enough? It looks like maybe Veeq is still considering his options here. Not actually producing anything just yet. Decides to go for another round of workers, trying to catch up with his opponent. And pretty soon, that will be a pretty big deal, I would say. Now, all that being said, you know, when we're looking at this, when we're seeing what's happening, the main thing that I'm looking at here are the Valkyries versus the mutas, and what can you do versus the ground army. Yeah, sure, you can deploy if you can get there in time, right? If you can maybe try to expand your influence and sort of slow crawl out versus this, but it kind of makes me, like, I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, you know, what would really help is something a little bit more mobile. This is where Cataphracts would probably be really helpful, but there are no mantles en route to this position. And as long as Veeq remains on top of his opponent, you know, he's got Zets over at the likely next base that Neblime is probably going to angle for. It really doesn't feel like this is a good option for Neblime. Like, I don't really know how he's going to get out of this situation unless he tries to use 4 base econ to get to tier 4, or tier 3 rather. There is tier 3 on the way. Iris is now mutating into the next level, and Mutat Spire, or not the Mutat Spire, which we already saw, but the Matravel Nest just finished over here above the ski-backed scab. I've been looking around to see if, you know, do we have any like other tier 2 structures. The Matravel Nest coming makes me think maybe it's Convolisks to try to like create those brood spawn on top of the Phalanxes. There isn't really a great like response to that right now, besides the Sentinels obviously are pretty useful for that. A lot of minerals and gas being banked right now for Veeq, so we'll see what he wants to do with all that once he selects his larva. We do have some Protathalors on the field. They are obviously pretty adept at dealing with single targets from afar. Phalanxes do destroy them if there's nothing else for the Phalanxes to target, because the Phalanxes outrange them. But admittedly, they are pretty good at dealing with the Phalanx, considering they don't really mind the armor as much. A lot of upfront damage, a lot of burst damage, you could say. Zet's just moving around, making sure to keep an eye on potential bases. So right now, it still feels like Veeq is in pretty good control of this situation, but he hasn't pressed his advantage. So this is a situation where Neblime is thinking about, how do I get ahead, or how do I maybe wrest control of the game back? Because he's been allowed to get ahead on workers, and definitely in terms of, like, you know, thinking about his next tech moves, he's nearing the break point. It's 1,400 of each resource to get to tier 3 as Terran, so something to consider. It's 1,800 gas, but less minerals to get to tier 3 as Zerg. This 12 o'clock base looks like it's Neblime's current main focus, but he has okay defenses throughout the rest of it. I would like to see maybe some vultures or something for mines, or some sort of more helpful map control. Although at this current stage, it feels like maybe he's been able to shake Veeq's boots a little bit. He's kind of knocking on the door with this mech army, moving through, trying his best to get what he can done. One of the Zets did, in fact, get spotted, or perhaps be the spotter, and now Azorius has sort of like path found into a different location. So yes, indeed, this 6 o'clock base is going to be Neblime's target. He doesn't want to allow his opponent to once again get a higher base location. But look at this. We've got a Cyprian, 2 Cyprians between these 2 anchors, a decent number of watchdogs. I don't think these mutas are going to survive, so that should actually be a pretty big victory in favor of Neblime. The question is, can his phalanxes hold the front while the madrigals dish out all of the spread damage? And honestly, because the madrigals were kind of like isolated in a pocket on the south, it feels like that's allowed Veeq to run away with the ground fight. So even though the Valkyries, which weren't even needed, end up making sure that the mutas all die at 12 o'clock, there's no army left over for Neblime. You can see the military forces here, you know, at this point, we're talking about an order of magnitude greater in terms of the army supply. So that's a pretty big deal, and I think Neblime realizes it. He wasn't able to use the timing of that particular fight to set this up. We had a ridiculous number of Zets turn into a ridiculous number of Vorvs behind that, so if there was any doubt he couldn't set this force up, that is a dub for the Veeqaner. And honestly, pretty cool to see him try Zerg out. Pretty cool to see Neblime start to use a little bit of that next round of tech changes. Well, we've got a couple more games in this set. There were 3 replays sent to me, so we're going to take a look at what those are up next. So if you enjoyed this and you want to check more about the project out, there are links all over the description of this video, including a Discord server where you can organize games of your own. And otherwise, just drop a sub, stick around. I'll be back very soon with more content like this, you know, continuing this series and casting more like it. Stay tuned.